Hello and welcome to this episode of Live with Lizzie Lee. I am your host, Lizzie. Joining me today is Professor Susan Shirk, research professor and chair of the 21st Century China Center of UCSD. Previously, Professor Shirk served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs in the Clinton administration. Thank you so much, Professor Shirk, for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
So, Professor Shirk, we watched Xi Jinping's open remarks at the 20th Party Congress. What do you think are the main takeaways?
Well, there aren't a lot of surprises, unfortunately. What we see is more continuity with the first decade of his rule. I know that many of us, and especially the business community, were looking to see whether or not he completely abandoned development as the main priority of the party. He didn't do that. He checked the box to express the importance of economic development as the key goal of the party. And yet it's pretty clear that security dominated the speech, and security considerations do dominate the policy of his regime.
I see. In your new book, Overreach, How China Derailed Its Peaceful Rise, you argue that China since 2008, but especially during Xi Jinping's decade, has overreached, per the title of the book. What are the consequences of Xi Jinping's over-concentration of power?
Well, overreach, of course, means to take things too far, to do things in an exaggerated way that actually harms yourself. So it's actions that backfire in harming China. And I do think that many of Xi Jinping's policies and actions are not good for China. That's one of the reasons that I dedicated the book to Chinese colleagues and people I've talked with who've helped me understand China. And I wrote the book really thinking about a Chinese audience as well as a Western audience. So the Xi Jinping's overreaching has harmed China in lots of ways. There's a snowballing international backlash because China looks like more of a threat than it did before. And this is not just the result of increased capabilities, even in the tech sector or the military sector. It's China's own policies and actions. So in my view, the building up of the artificial islands in the South China Sea, the punishment of Australia for calling for an international investigation on COVID, the sanctions against South Korea because of THAAD. In the end, these actions really snap back against China's own national interests. And you can make similar arguments about many of Xi Jinping's domestic politics as well.
But are there signs of dissent or pushback within the top echelon of the party elite?
Well, that is really difficult question because especially since we have been unable to go to China for more than 2 years, and the people I talk to, I'm not able to talk frankly with them. So all I really can say is that putting myself in the shoes of other Chinese leaders, I believe that they must have a considerable frustration with Xi Jinping because of the lack of power sharing, and the pressure that he's putting them under. And also the fact that his actual policy choices, which he's made in a rather arbitrary fashion. I have one chapter in which I list a few of these bolts from the blue in which suddenly there's a new Xi policy, such as the 2021 crackdown on the private tech sector right before Ant Financial is about to list, and of course the destruction of the whole after-school tutoring industry. So these are actions that suddenly come out and kind of are a major shock to the system, and of course have been quite harmful to China because the private sector is so important for employment as well as for innovation. You know, these bolts from the blue are very much the result of overconcentration of power. And other leaders are really not able to check, constrain, or influence Xi Jinping's decisions very well. And so these decisions seem to come from him. And then everyone who is so worried about their own careers because they're all in competition with one another, certainly to avoid being targeted by the anti-corruption campaign, which still continues. We're in the third phase of that now, as well as seeking promotion for themselves. And that's why they feel that they can't really speak honestly to him about the downsides of his policies, and that they have to gush expressions of loyalty and then over-comply with his policy choices, even if they know that they're bad ones. So that's why my hunch is, I don't really have hard evidence of this. I don't think any of us do, but my hunch is that other people in the party leadership are really very frustrated with Xi Jinping's leadership, and they would like to see some changes.
I see. And you also argue that Xi Jinping might resort to provoking foreign conflicts to divert domestic frustration. So how a scenario like that will likely play out?
Well, let me first say that we know as social scientists that diversionary war is a reality.
Right.
And Aaron Carter, an international relations comparative politics expert on China at University of Southern California, has done one study in which she found that 40% of Chinese conflict behavior is the result of differences within the elite, and that she categorizes it as diversionary. So, I'm not, my book does not make a point of arguing that we should expect diversionary war from Xi Jinping. But I do see that the costs of overreach are piling up on China. If the party can't deliver the goods economically to the public, can't satisfy the dissatisfactions of the elite over the lack of power sharing and the quality of Xi's decisions, then what's left? I mean, what's left is nationalism and distraction. So, and the most common form of distraction for a major power like China is to blame a foreign threat and to maybe provoke some kind of crisis that will cause people to rally round his leadership and the party.
I see. And importantly, your book also warned that the West should be cautious of the tendency of overreacting to Xi Jinping's overreaching. I wonder if you can elaborate a little more on that point.
Yes. Several years ago, I gave a talk on overreach and overreaction, and quite a few people have asked me, well, why is this book only about overreach and not about overreaction too? Although I do devote the last chapter to the question of US policy and make recommendations not to overreach. But this book is aimed at figuring out the puzzle of why China, after decades of very effective and restrained foreign policy and diplomacy, made this shift in the mid-2000s and why it continues now. So I'm a comparative politics specialist, and I'm really focusing more on the connections between domestic politics and international behavior for China, not so much on the interaction. But I recognize, of course, that outcomes are very much the result of the strategic interaction between the US and China. Overreaction, I feel that for the past 6 years, we have been overreacting by exaggerating the threat from China. Even though I am very concerned about the dynamics inside China, the overreaching, but I think that we shouldn't give up on diplomacy, and that we really haven't engaged in any effective effort to negotiate the key disputes we have with China for the past 6 years, and that we should be a lot smarter about how we use both carrots and sticks, meaning reassurance as well as punishments like sanctions, to try to induce moderation in Chinese policies, both mainly its foreign policy behavior. And I just don't feel that we've really tried hard enough. Now, the problem is that right now, the public in China, as well as Xi Jinping and the elite, have concluded that it really doesn't matter what they do, that the entity list, our policies to sanction China are simply an effort to trip it up, slow it down, contain it, and that it's the result of our own misperceptions of China. So we need to find a way to communicate better and to make clear that it really is about China's own policies and behavior. And were they to moderate them, the door remains open to rebuilding a constructive relationship with China.
If you enjoy our discussions here, I'm sure you would find value in our new powerful marketplace tool for investors, also called China Edge. It tracks, distills, and analyzes both Chinese language and English language materials about Chinese companies, business leaders, and government entities, and reviews the often hidden links between them. For our YouTube viewers, we are offering a limited time 50% discount. Just go to the link you see on the screen and use the code EDGE50. Also, sign up for the China Edge newsletter. It's a daily 2-minute rundown of China business news you don't want to miss. The link is right here on the screen. You can also click on the link in the video's description section to get your complimentary subscription today.